President Trump is set to deliver his address to the joint session of Congress after 6 weeks of introducing his second-term agenda at breakneck speed.
A slew of executive orders has upended much of his predecessor Joe Biden's vision for the country. Mr. Trump is expected to celebrate those changes and try to win over more of the country. Nick Harper has more from Washington.
This is the annual opportunity for the US president to speak to Congress and the American people about the health of the nation, the changes he's making, and what's ahead in the coming months. The first address of any presidency is not technically called a State of the Union, but it still comes with all the familiar pomp and circumstance and normally some theatrics thrown in. Trump's no stranger to joint addresses and State of the Union speeches. He's likely to receive a hero's welcome from Republicans. And it's expected much of his speech will focus on his domestic agenda as he gives insight into the last 6 weeks since he re-entered the Oval Office.
Absolutely, one of the things Donald Trump is going to be doing on Tuesday is defending and explaining exactly what has been going on over the past couple of months, especially with regard to Elon Musk and the entire Doge project. This is a chance for him to explain to Americans his position that this is going to save them money in the long run, and perhaps they might even get a check in the mail as a bonus.
That could be the big crowd-pleasing announcement. The president has teased sending American taxpayers a check with his signature on it, money that has been recouped from Doge's cost-cutting efforts. But the president is likely to also make mention of multiple global issues.
For Donald Trump, he has had to come in with a number of different crises, including what's going on with Ukraine, President Zelensky maybe explaining a bit about what happened there, as well as talking about what's going on in Israel. And of course, we know that China is a big issue for him. And let's not forget that the border issue and the tariffs are something that are on the horizon. And he's going to want to explain those to the American people and why he thinks his plans in all four of these regards are going to be beneficial.
At a time of so much uncertainty, the president's words will have an impact, perhaps reassuring or perhaps worrying Americans and global allies alike. Nick Harper, CNA, Washington.
Still ahead on Asia First.
The rules-based international order that has prevailed for 80 years is at risk of degenerating into the law of the jungle where might makes right.
Despite those uncertainties, Foreign Minister Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan says Singapore is in a strong position.
And a harrowing tale of escape from a scam center on the Thai-Myanmar border. A survivor tells CNA about the 6 months he spent while trapped.
The middle class is perceived as a strength of the economy. Rising middle class is a sign of country doing better.
Yet, Thailand's middle class is buried in a mountain of debt.
รู้สึกแย่ค่ะรู้สึกอึดอัดเหมือนกับว่าทำไมฉันศักยภาพฉันหาเงินไม่ได้มากกว่านี้อะไรอย่างเงี้ย
กินอะไรไม่ได้ก็ต้องเผื่อตังค์ไว้คิดไว้ก่อนกินอันนี้ปุ๊บพอนี่ไหม
And what is driving this trend?
เรากำลังมีคนชั้นกลางที่จนลง
Insight, Thursday on CNA.
In 2025, I will be the same age as Singapore. We will both be 60 years old.
60. It's more than just a number. It's a crossroads.
What am I going to do now? What have I done? Have I done enough?
I'm going on a journey to uncover what comes next.
皆さん、年だからできないんじゃなくて、年だからできることって必ずあると思うんで。
Seva is very important because we do something for others without expecting. They will do for no expectations.
It's so important for us to come out and meet friends and just to clear our minds.
Because life doesn't slow down at 60. It begins.
60岁还是很年轻，还很多时间。Me
I think at any age you can reinvent yourself.
Enjoy.
Watch Born in 1965 on demand at cna.asia.
When you have neighborhood friends who are loitering in the streets, they tend to resolve conflict in a certain way. So they are actually quite mean to each other. I often tell my staff, you just have to try to keep them out of trouble as much as possible.
I take the blood test. It's okay. Take the blood test again. No.
I was very naive. I didn't know there were that many children suffering from cancer.
So the moment I step into art, you know that feeling that you know that you just stepped into your second home?
Providing equal healthcare for persons with intellectual disability. We want to extend healthcare provision at the community setting. We need to be the advocates because we understand what it is to have good healthcare.
In certain setups in their system, they can find it quite challenging in some places. So I think that's why they find Play Buddy a place that they can feel belonged.
Singapore Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan warns
that a new world order, which describes the, quote, law of the jungle, is emerging. Now, this comes amid growing global uncertainty, though Dr. Balakrishnan notes that Singapore is in a strong position rooted in its robust economy, defense capabilities, and domestic cohesion. Rebecca Mateo with this report.
The world is now shifting from unipolarity to multipolarity, from free trade to protectionism, from multilateralism to unilateralism, from globalization to hyper-nationalism, from openness to xenophobia, from optimism to anxiety.
Big words that might seem abstract to some, but are rapidly becoming realities for Singapore. Foreign Affairs Minister Vivian Balakrishnan says this shift has affected trade and growth. Take, for example, the US tariffs. While Singapore is not a direct target, these changes will impact global trade and in turn affect the country. Dr. Balakrishnan says that's because Singapore is an open economy, one that is deeply integrated with the world's major powers. Another effect is on war and peace. Conflicts like the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, now in its fourth year, and the crisis in Gaza have not only caused a humanitarian crisis, but also fueled radicalization. Dr. Balakrishnan says these events have also disrupted global oil trade, with energy and food prices also surging in its aftermath.
All these global developments on both the economic and geostrategic fronts have profound implications for us. The rules-based international order that has prevailed for 80 years is at risk of degenerating into the law of the jungle where might makes right. We may, in fact, be reverting to a time when the world is divided into blocs controlled by big powers. And by definition, this must mean the loss of choice and autonomy for small states.
But Dr. Balakrishnan says that despite Singapore's size, the country has the agency to build strength, protect its sovereignty and stay relevant. The key is for its people to remain united and not let different views on various developments divide the country.
Because of our strength economically, we cannot be bullied or bought. We have significant national reserves. It is a big advantage for Singapore not to have to beg for aid. We have no need for assistance or loans that will subject us to external pressure. We are not dependent on any single external partner. And perhaps even more importantly, we do not depend on any external country to defend Singapore. We have the capability and the will to defend ourselves.
In this shifting landscape, Dr. Balakrishnan stresses that Singapore must continue its balanced and constructive engagement with all partners. For example, he says it is important that Singapore maintained relationships with both US and China amid rivalry between the two world superpowers.
We have maintained our relevance and credibility with both powers by being consistent, by being transparent, and being constructive. And we don't simply tell them what they want to hear, but we are principled, we're trustworthy, and we play a straight game. And both of them know that when Singapore takes a stand, it's not because we're doing it at the behest of its rival, of its adversary, but that we take a stand because we have done our own calculation of what is in our long-term enlightened national interests.
Beyond the superpowers, Singapore also works with many partners around the world, including India, Japan and the Middle East. Dr. Balakrishnan says the island state has overlapping circles of friends and has a network of 27 free trade agreements that cover 90% of the nation's trade. Singapore also works with neighbours like Malaysia on maritime and airspace issues, while working with ASEAN to boost regional resilience in areas like food and energy. To complement these efforts, Singapore must also be able to attract and retain talent and technology from all over the world.
We will take firm action and move decisively against errant individuals and companies that flout our domestic laws. We do not condone companies taking advantage of their association with us to engage in evasive, deceptive or dubious business practices for short-term commercial advantages, because that actually sullies and takes unfair advantage of Singapore's reputation.
Dr. Balakrishnan says staying open and agile in seizing new opportunities has been key to Singapore's success, and this must remain its guiding principle moving forward.
And we do apologize for the technical glitch at the start of this story. My microphone failed, and thank you very much for taking over, Julie.
Anytime. Well, the beauty of live TV, I guess. Well, moving on to another story we're tracking for you this hour. A multinational crackdown on scam syndicates is seeing thousands of workers sent home in recent weeks.
Chinese state media call the workers scam suspects, but rescue groups say many are victims of modern slavery. A man who spent 6 months trapped inside one scam compound tells CNA how he got out. CNA's Tan Chiu-Yi reports.
This compound on the Thai-Myanmar border is known as KK Park. Thousands of people were believed to be held inside, many of them trafficked from overseas and forced to work as scammers. Gavesh from Sri Lanka was one of them.
It was very scary inside. I never thought that I will come out alive.
Gavesh, not his real name, thought he'd had landed the perfect job on Facebook in 2022.
Could be a tech job, or could be a customer service job, a marketing job. But the basic idea is you'll be working in a call center type location, a modern building. Pictures are, look good, look professional. The company name is listed. There's a salary that seems attractive but not crazy.
In August that year, Gavesh flew to Bangkok. He was picked up and driven to Mae Sot, about 500 kilometers away on the Thai-Myanmar border. When the car stopped, the nightmare began.
There were like 10 Thailand people who gathered around the car, and they took our luggages and they were like, come, follow, go. Like they also can't speak English. They were like rushing us.
A boat took them across a small river. There, Gavesh was taken to a compound and made to wait in an office.
I looked like a pig at that time because we were walking through a paddy field for about 1 kilometer. I had mud onto my knees.
He had no idea he was in Myanmar, but
I knew that something is wrong because that place had huge walls and surrounded by barbed wires, high security. The armed guys, looks like they were not talking to us. They will definitely shoot us if we run.
They took his phone and passport, and for the next 6 months, he was forced to text victims in the US, Japan, Taiwan, gain their trust, and get them to part with their money. A large drum in the office sounded whenever someone invested $100,000 or more in their crypto scam.
Every time that drum hits, that we knew, okay, some guy in the world has lost that guy's money. Some woman in the world has lost their money. They are celebrating, but it's a loss for that guy or a girl.
Satellite images show KK Park growing. From a few buildings among rice fields in 2020 to a small city by 2024. Gavesh says they worked 16-hour days in the office.
We were actually prisoners. We had a timetable for everything. While working, you can't cross the legs, you can't yawn, you can't talk to other people, you can't sing, you can't whistle, nothing. It was dead silent, and they played loud music because we had to work in nighttime, and because people are getting sleepy, I think they put loud music.
Others have suffered worse.
We're talking about electrocution, we're talking about torture, we're talking about threats of deadly violence, we're talking about watching other people be beaten, and we're talking about threats of being sold into prostitution in the case of women, or threats of having organs removed.
Gavesh says he was sold 3 times.
If you don't perform, they sell you to a different Chinese boss. It's like I'm an item. They sell me as a package. They're selling me with all my belongings. They ask us to take our computer, take our chair, and then you go.
Thousands of people have been released and sent home in recent weeks as China, Thailand and Myanmar authorities crack down on scam syndicates. Gavesh paid his way out in 2023, a ransom of nearly $2,000 saved up from his wages at KK Park.
When I stepped out from the vehicle in Bangkok, it was like, thank God I came alive. That was the moment that I after so many months, that I felt really good.
It's been 2 years since he got out, but Gavesh hasn't told his family what really happened to him. The International Justice Mission says other survivors have gone home only to be charged for scamming crimes they did under duress. The people freed in the latest raids are yet to be judged, either as scammers or as victims. Tan Chiu-yi, CNA, Singapore.
We have more coverage of this issue on our website, cna.asia. An expert explains how authorities in Southeast Asia can augment efforts to detect, rescue and repatriate victims of overseas job scam operations.
All right, in the next hour on Asia First.
Well, I just think you should be more appreciative because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin.
We track an escalating feud between Presidents Trump and Zelensky and what it means for the course of Russia's war in Ukraine.
And a tense geopolitical environment and tariff tensions set the backdrop for China's biggest political meetings of the year.
We also have the latest market reaction as U.S. tariffs roil global markets, plus Bitcoin falters as optimism wanes on America's crypto reserve plan, and we will explain why.
This March, witness the fight for survival and change. Can science bring back what was lost? Explore the astonishing world of gene editing and cloning as scientists push boundaries beyond imagination on the resurrection quest. In southern Bangladesh, refugees, farmers and elephants fight to live in the same space. Is the Freedom Corridor the answer to their conflict? As technology evolves, so do the hidden threats shaping our world. Award-winning series, Undercover Asia, returns to investigate them. This March, on CNA. The CNA Summit 2025 Trade-Offs in Leadership. Presenting partner, Sing Life, a better way to financial freedom.
Leadership demands tough choices.
If you're trying to transition the company, change the strategy of the company, it's not really up to the investors, it's more up to the consumers.
Behind every decision lies an external trade-off.
Do you go fast, go big, or do you find such a way that you don't bet the farm?
What choices shape leadership today and redefine it tomorrow? Trade-offs in leadership. Highlights from the CNA Summit 2025. Tonight on CNA.
Impact partner, NVPC. Main partner, Oppo, Find N5. This is Asia First.
Good Tuesday morning, I'm Julie Yu. It's 9 a.m. here in Singapore. The headlines this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump renewing criticism of his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky.
President Zelensky supposedly made a statement today in AP. I'm not a big fan of AP, so maybe it was an incorrect statement, but he said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time. And he better not be right about that. That's all I'm saying.
He wants Mr. Zelensky to be, quote, more appreciative of American support. And U.S. media reports now are saying military aid to Ukraine has been paused. I'm Elizabeth Neo. Asian markets are tracking Wall Street lower, with President Trump confirming 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada. While market prices of Mexican tequila, beer, and avocados likely to go up, along with Canadian crude oil and lumber. Plus, cars will cost more. Meanwhile, China is mulling retaliatory measures, with import duties on its goods being doubled. Well, Taiwan's biggest company, TSMC, promises to spend at least $100 billion in the U.S. against the backdrop of tariff threats and tensions with mainland China. Amid the deal-making, President Trump declares an invasion of the island would be catastrophic.
I'm Arnold Gay. Geopolitical challenges and economic headwinds set the stage for the most anticipated event on China's political calendar. The two sessions opened with observers focusing on Taiwan and foreign policy amid two raging wars. Plus, the country's growth target in light of lackluster consumer spending and a sluggish real estate sector. And ahead, the Vatican says Pope Francis is now alert, having experienced 2 episodes of acute respiratory failure. The 88-year-old pontiff was admitted to hospital 18 days ago with pneumonia.
The continued tensions from last week's Oval Office spat is heating up. U.S. President Donald Trump has paused military aid to Ukraine.
A White House official said the move is to ensure the military assistance is contributing to a solution. Mr. Trump's decision comes just days after he clashed with his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky. The pause reportedly involves military equipment already in transit to Ukraine. U.S. media reporting that the temporary halt will last until President Trump determines the country's leaders demonstrate a good faith commitment to peace.
The U.S. leader earlier in the day also suggested that Mr. Zelensky, quote, won't be around very long if he doesn't agree to a deal with Russia. The U.S. has been pressuring Ukraine to sign a minerals for aid agreement as part of a wider peace move. Mr. Trump doesn't think the agreement is dead yet, despite Mr. Zelensky continuing to insist security guarantees be part of it. He also had this to say when asked what the Ukrainian president needs to do to restart negotiations.
Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because, as you know, that's right there. That's the border. I want to see it end fast. I don't want to see this go on for years and years. Now, President Zelensky supposedly made a statement today in AP. I'm not a big fan of AP, so maybe it was an incorrect statement, but he said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time. And he better not be right about that. That's all I'm saying.
President Trump earlier slammed Mr. Zelensky's statement as the worst that could have been made by the Ukrainian president, and that the U.S. will not put up with it much longer. Now, here's what the Ukrainian leader actually said.
До угоди про закінчення війни ще дуже далеко. Ніхто всі ці кроки не розпочав. Мир, який ми будемо передбачати в майбутньому, повинен бути справедливим, чесним, а головне сталий мир.
In the meantime, the Kremlin has reacted to the Oval Office spat, the spokesperson blaming Ukraine's leader Zelensky, accusing him of not wanting peace and lacking diplomatic skills. President Trump has dialed up the pressure with threats in Ukraine to get the minerals deal done. Kate Fisher tells us if he can afford to kill it and walk away.
I don't think ultimately he wants to do that. He is, as we know, a deal maker at heart. Of course, he wants a political win. He wants to be seen as the peacemaker, not just in Ukraine, but in Gaza as well. He is after, he has said, the Nobel Peace Prize. And to do that, he does need to end the war. And he wants something to show for it. So politically, I don't think he wants to walk away. He wants to prove to the Ukraine Republican hawks on Capitol Hill that he can end this war and get something for the US in return. And while he's busy pressing Ukraine to agree to terms, it may be that he will also need to secure concessions from Russia too to make this deal, because just accepting all of Russia's talking points would be a blow to his image that he's trying to create of this shrewd deal maker, this statesman. And as I heard one expert, one analyst here in Washington say, Nobel Peace Prizes are not awarded for capitulation.
America's priorities appear starkly different from that of European leaders who've been trying to convince Mr. Trump to provide Kyiv with security guarantees. We spoke earlier to Klaus Laris, Distinguished Professor of History and International Affairs at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and he told us whether Europe and the US will be able to find common ground on their approach to the war in Ukraine.
Starmer was in Washington, Macron was in Washington. They tried to push Donald Trump toward a peace deal which is fairer to Ukraine, but they don't seem to have had much luck. And Zelensky going to Europe after that very difficult Oval Office meeting with Vance and Trump didn't go down in Washington very well either, because Trump sees the Europeans not just as a weak power, but also as a power which sides clearly with Zelensky. And as he sees it, both Zelensky and the Europeans seem to be prolonging the war rather than trying to overcome the war as soon as possible. He doesn't seem to understand that making concessions to Putin will have long-lasting consequences in a geopolitical sense, which is not good for the Western powers, which is not good for the United States. But all of that doesn't seem to concern Donald Trump too much. And the Europeans, of course, want peace as well, but not a peace at any cost. They want a peace which doesn't hand victory to Putin and which makes sure that within a month or 2 months' time or a year or two, Putin would not regroup and attack again Ukraine. They want to have security guarantees from the United States, as does Zelensky, which would prevent Putin, they hope, from attacking Ukraine again after a ceasefire has been agreed.
Well, President Trump also barreling ahead with tariffs. The White House says he has signed and ordered doubling duties on Chinese imports to 20% as promised. Asia-Pacific markets are mostly down with concerns over looming trade war going into overdrive. The Nikkei continuing to fall, now down by 1.4%. The smaller topics also down by more than 0.5%. But South Korea's Kospi is the outlier for now. In fact, it is trading higher by about 0.4%. A surge in defense stocks offsetting losses by South Korean chip-making giants. And those broader Asian losses actually mirroring the sell-off on Wall Street overnight. The Dow, in fact, lost 650 points. S&P 500 fell some 1.8% for its worst loss since in December. And NASDAQ some 2.6% there as Mr. Trump also shut down any hope of a final reprieve on tariffs against Mexico and Canada.
No room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow.
Well, investors had been hoping for a last-minute deal similar to the one struck by both countries in February when Canada and Mexico offered concessions to stem the flow of drugs and illegal migrants into the U.S. Now America's northern and southern neighbors say that they are ready to respond to those tariffs set to take effect later today.
Let's be clear. If Trump is imposing tariffs, we're ready. We are ready with $155 billion worth of tariffs, and we're ready with the first tranche of tariffs.
Vamos a esperar qué pasa. En esto hay que tener temple, serenidad y paciencia. Y tenemos plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D. Entonces vamos a esperar el día de hoy.
Meanwhile, the Communist Party-run news outlet Global Times says China is looking at retaliatory measures on U.S. agriculture and food products. Beijing has criticized the Trump administration's trade actions and said it is ready to safeguard China's interests.
美方将经贸问题政治化、武器化，以芬太尼为借口对华加征关税，对中美正常的经贸投资合作 人为设障，损害的是美国自身经济利益和国际信誉。中方愿同美方在平等和相互尊重的基础上，通过对话磋商解决各自关切，同时将采取一切必要措施，维护自身的正当权益。
With tariff threats pressuring firms to invest in America, Taiwanese chip-making giant TSMC says it will spend an additional $100 billion in the U.S. It is planning to build 5 new chip factories there in the coming years and unveiled its investments in a meeting with President Trump.
We must be able to build the chips and semiconductors that we need right here in American factories with American skill and American labor. And that's exactly what we're doing. As you know, Taiwan pretty much has a monopoly on that market. And I think pretty much is not a term that's even appropriate. They do have a monopoly. And this is a tremendous move by the most powerful company in the world.
TSMC's total investments in the U.S. now set to reach around $165 billion. The company is the world's largest contract chip maker, supplying to major U.S. firms, including Apple, Intel, and NVIDIA. Analysts say that TSMC's move also comes amid its concern over critical tech supplies being disrupted in the event of any potential conflict with Beijing. And reporters asked President Trump whether the new investment could minimize U.S. impact in the likelihood of a Chinese invasion. He dismissed that talk, saying such a scenario would be catastrophic.
China begins its annual 2 sessions gathering today. The major meetings offer a glimpse into the priorities of Communist Party leaders for the year ahead.
The week-long political event is taking place as the country faces both geopolitical and economic challenges. CNA's Deborah Wong has more.
我们也清醒认识到，当前 内外环境发生深刻复杂变化，中国经济运行面临一些困难和挑战，消费需求仍然不足，一些领域风险仍待化解。
With this year's 2 sessions taking place amid fresh tariffs from the U.S., questions from the media centered around how China should improve economic growth, modernization, and opening up to stay competitive.
聚焦数据要素市场、人工智能应用等主题，深入协商座谈，分析促进新质生产力发展的途径和体制机制保障，提出针对性、前瞻性对策建议，得到主管部门重视和采纳。
Mr. Liu added that committee members have conducted studies on how to promote free trade zones and improve cross-border data flows. Now, the focus on tech is also unsurprising, given that it's seen as a key driver of Chinese modernization. President Xi Jinping's meeting with top tech leaders in February signaled that more policy support is on the way. The fact that the chiefs of BYD, Huawei, Alibaba, Tencent, Xiaomi and DeepSeek had front-row seats at the symposium is not surprising in the least. They are giants in electric vehicle, cloud computing, AI space, sectors not just at the heart of an aggressive US-China tech race, but what China believes are key to self-reliance and supply chain security, as well as stronger productivity. Several members of the CPPCC also attended the symposium, so we can expect discussions to center around these growth areas, for instance, on how to improve financing or regulatory support to drive innovation. The CPPCC will convene for the opening on Tuesday. Deborah Wong, CNA, Beijing.
We'll head to our website, cna.asia, for this explainer, where our China correspondents unpack everything you need to know about the country's biggest annual political event and what it means for the world.
Still ahead, another bumper share sale in Hong Kong. The China's electric vehicle maker BYD raises more than $5.5 billion as it looks to localize production in several places around the world in the face of tariff threats. Plus, Bitcoin falters as optimism wanes on America's crypto reserve plan. We'll explain why.
Visionary or disruptor, Trump insider or Washington interloper.
Here's a drive to get things done.
As the world's richest man shakes up its most powerful nation.
And so this, violates democracy at its core.
Is he setting his sights on the rest of the world?
Fight for a great future for Germany.
Elon Musk, super influencer, Wednesday on CNA.
We killed them.
Is the resurrection of a species even possible?
These clones, they're the closest thing we have to real resurrection.
We're taking an elephant and we're making a little bit more mammoth-like.
I don't need one mammoth, I need herds. If we want to establish a system, we need population.
This still involves an unprecedented amount of genome engineering.
You got to do it for the right reasons.
Is it going to be fair to that animal to bring it back into the world that we're in now?
If the question is de-extinction hubris or hope, I think the only honest answer is yes. It's a little bit of both.
The Resurrection Quest starts 15th March, Saturday on CNA.
1,500 movies. I don't want this flight to end.
Well, as the tariff clock edges closer to midnight, risk appetite ticks lower. The Nikkei continuing to trade in the red by more than 1.4%. As South Korea's Kospi remains the outlier for now, the country has launched a secondary stock trading platform called Next Trade, which will run from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. That is longer than the trading hours on the main bourse, and it's also offering lower fees. Singapore's STI joins the trading day on the back foot, down 0.3%. Australia remains underwater by 0.1%. Of course, investors, they are also eyeing potential Chinese stimulus package expected to be announced at the country's annual parliamentary gathering known as the Two Sessions. And checking on AI-related stocks in Asia after shares of industry darling Nvidia sank some 9% on tariff fears. Asian chip makers here taking a hit there, with Advantis continuing to lead the way, down more than 7.5%. Investors, they are also weighing the effects of a chip giant TSMC's new U.S. expansion plans. It has pledged a fresh $100 billion in investments. The shares of the world's largest chip manufacturer, though, is down some 2%. Now, earlier, Bob Dole, Chief Investment Officer at Crossmark Global Investment, says cyclical consumer goods would be among the hardest hit from President Trump's tariffs.
Go back to almost a month ago when there was talk about these tariffs for Canada and Mexico. And the next day, President took that threat away. So I think there was some hope on Wall Street that the proposed tariffs of 25% on Canada and Mexico would, in fact, go away. And that was part of the reason for the sell-off. The U.S. is starting to see some weakening in the economy, so I think that has some people concerned about earnings, et cetera. Obviously, the cyclicals in general are the ones that are most difficult, the goods-related cyclicals. And of course, that includes autos and various parts of technology. Less so the domestic cyclicals, although they would get hurt if the economy weakens. Look, tariffs are a tax, and that means somebody's prices go up, or maybe everybody's prices go up, and that's not been received well by investors. I was hoping when President Trump a week or so ago used the phrase reciprocal tariffs, that might actually be good news, because if you're charging me 3% and I'm not charging you anything and we do reciprocal tariffs, I'm coming after you for 3%. But you might say, before you do that, how about if I take mine off and we could actually see tariffs falling? So far, that's just wishful thinking.
Malaysia's semiconductor industry is facing uncertainty amid concerns that the U.S. will hike tariffs on imported chips. The country, which is seeking to be a vital part of the global chip supply chain, is worried that tariffs could affect its exports and also hurt new investments. Melissa Goh takes a closer look at the prospect of steep U.S. tariffs on the chip sector.
Known as the Silicon Valley of the East, Malaysia's Penang state is the major hub for semiconductor manufacturing. It's buzzing with high-tech factories, innovation hubs, and research centers, attracting billions of investments from multinational corporations. Penang Chief Minister says any U.S. tariff hikes are not beneficial to anyone.
So basically, their own company will be impacted, although we will be impacted in the sense that if factories here are impacted, our jobs will be impacted. Whatever tariff policy should recognize the fact that it is their own people that will be impacted as well.
The Penang Chief Minister is hoping that Malaysia, as ASEAN chair this year, will be able to commence an ASEAN-US summit either here in Malaysia or in the United States as soon as possible to facilitate friendly engagements and dialogues with authorities in order to minimize the impact of proposed US tariffs and restrictions on the semiconductor industry. This, as Penang aims to cement its position not just as a regional, but a global semiconductor hub.
Malaysia is the world's sixth largest exporter of semiconductors, worldwide accounting for 13%. The chip industry hopes that any U.S. tariffs will be fair and level the playing field.
But I think it has got to do with what Donald Trump wants to do. If he slapped a tariff like, say, 25% worldwide to all semiconductor companies or countries, then it doesn't really matter because we are all equal, 25%, so we compete. But if some countries are 25%, some countries are 10%, of course, if we are 10%, then we have a big advantage.
To stay ahead of the competition, Malaysia is trying to move up the value chain.
We are now shifting gear as well into promoting IC design, which is something that would open more opportunity and make us more resilient as well.
Industry experts say that the government also needs to work closely with the industry to encourage smaller players to become local champions.
We need to have a very bold and clear plan of moving this forward, because we have to push the boundary. And the government needs to work with us to really develop a safe environment to all incentivize us to really push that, because we have to move the entire industry. Increasing the pay cannot be done only by one company or one organization. It has to be by the entire industry.
While better pay will address brain drain and attract the right talent, raising salaries will be tough if the industry continues to focus on assembly and packaging.
Wages need to be more competitive. We are working with headquarters and saying, pay our people more,
commensurate with the value you extract out of Malaysia, which is why we went from 10 engineers to 100 to now thousands and thousands. With the finite resources we have, double down on AI, teach the students how to learn AI, and then go after the bigger slice of the supply chain in the world.
If the US president seeks to swiftly close the nearly $17 billion trade deficit with Malaysia, Putrajaya expects US tariffs to halve Malaysia's trade growth this year. And that could harm its key exports, particularly semiconductors, raising concerns about the country's economic stability. Melissa Goh, CNA, Georgetown, Malaysia.
Well, cryptocurrencies took a sharp turn lower overnight as optimism quickly evaporated over President Donald Trump's proposal to set up a national strategic crypto reserve. Bitcoin backpedaled after an early rise. Prices of its peers such as Ether, XRP, Solana, those also headed south. Now, the decline comes as traders turn more cautious amid a shortage of details about Mr. Trump's planned crypto initiative. In a recent post on Truth Social, Mr. Trump mentioned that his January executive order on digital assets would set up a stockpile of major cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, Ether, XRP, Solana, and Cardano. Now, this announcement sparked a brief rally in digital asset prices yesterday, as some analysts have warned that a random selection of speculative tools like this may enrich the insiders and creators of these coins at the expense of U.S. taxpayers. While Trump has appointed several crypto-friendly officials since he took office, the detailed policy announcements for investors remain absent so far. He will host a crypto summit later this week. A BYD now reinforcing hopes of a revival in Chinese stocks after a years-long slump. The electric vehicle maker has raised $5.6 billion in an upsized share sale that is Hong Kong's largest in 4 years. The term sheet shows that the share offerings had been increased by 10% on the back of a record-breaking month for overseas sales in February. BYD is reportedly looking to use the fresh capital to expand its overseas business and invest in research and development. The firm earlier announced plans to localize production in several parts of the world to bypass growing tariffs on China-made EVs. And that is your business update for now. Back to you, Julian Arnold.
All right, Liz, thank you very much. Still ahead on Asia First, the Vatican says Pope Francis suffered 2 episodes of acute respiratory failure, but remained alert and oriented during treatment.
We give you a preview of U.S. President Donald Trump's address to the joint session of Congress after introducing a slew of executive orders upending Joe Biden's plans for the nation.
I'm traveling the world uncovering tech that gives early warning signals to forest fires.
So the sensors woke up. It's detected something in the air.
Where extraordinary innovation is helping land and people.
So, pilion mo ang set deployment site.
Lots of people earn a lot of money with data. So why not the communities on the ground, right?
Tech to save the world. Friday on CNA.
Saturday on Japan Hour.
千代田区はふるさと納税制度の活用を開始いたしました。これ以上の減少は看過できない。物価高による影響というところは家計にも。
付与するポータルサイトを通じた寄付募集の禁止。
なんかいただけるものはいただきたいですけど。
この告示の撤回を求め、このような署名活動を始めたと。
Japan Hour, Saturday on CNA. Japan Hour is brought to you by Sumitomo Corporation. MUFG, committed to empowering a brighter future. Zip Air, winter fares are now available. And IHI. This March, witness the fight for survival and change. Can science bring back what was lost? Explore the astonishing world of gene editing and cloning as scientists push boundaries beyond imagination on the resurrection quest. In southern Bangladesh, refugees, farmers and elephants fight to live in the same space. Is the Freedom Corridor the answer to their conflict? As technology evolves, so do the hidden threats shaping our world. Award-winning series Undercover Asia returns to investigate them. This March on CNA.
Good morning. It is 9:30 here in Singapore. This is Asia First.
And here are the top stories we've been following. U.S. President Donald Trump renewing criticism of his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky.
President Zelensky supposedly made a statement today in AP. I'm not a big fan of AP, so maybe it was an incorrect statement, but he said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time. And he better not be right about that. That's all I'm saying.
Still, the American leader says he doesn't think the Ukraine minerals deal is dead, but he wants Mr. Zelensky to be, quote, more appreciative of U.S. support.
Asian markets track Wall Street lower as President Trump ends a month-long delay and confirms 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada. Plus, China mulling over retaliatory measures with import duties on its goods being doubled.
Taiwan's biggest company, TSMC, promises to spend at least $100 billion in the U.S. against a backdrop of tariff threats and tensions with mainland China. And with the deal-making, President Trump declares an invasion of the island would be catastrophic.
And geopolitical challenges and economic headwinds set the stage for the most anticipated event on China's political calendar. The two sessions open with observers focusing on Taiwan and foreign policy amid two raging wars, plus the country's growth target in light of lackluster consumer spending and a sluggish real estate sector. But first,
the Vatican says that Pope Francis has resumed the use of an oxygen mask after suffering 2 episodes of acute respiratory failure on Monday.
The Vatican adds the pontiff was alert, focused, and cooperative during the treatment.
The Vatican is reporting another setback in Pope Francis's recovery from pneumonia. Doctors say he suffered 2 more respiratory crises today, and they had to put him back on the non-invasive mechanical ventilation. They also had to perform what's called a bronchoscopy, where they snaked a tube down into his airways, guided by a camera, to suction out the mucus and secretions that he's not been able to cough out on his own. They speak of these episodes as in the past tense, meaning they are over, but they are still saying that his prognosis is guarded, meaning he is not out of danger.
Doctors say the mucus buildup was part of his body's reaction to the original pneumonia and not a new infection. Acute respiratory failure occurs when the lungs cannot provide enough oxygen to the blood or when there is excess carbon dioxide in the body.
The latest developments are a new setback to the Pope's recovery as he continues his more than 2-week battle with pneumonia. Well-wishers from across the world have traveled to Rome to pray for his health.
In Germany, wir hoffen, dass bald gesund wird und wieder die Amtsgeschäfte des Papstes übernimmt. Gott möge ihn schützen und heilen.
I wish him well to get well soon, and I continue praying for him. And I ask all the people in the whole world to continue praying for our Holy Pope.
At least 2 people have died and 5 others injured after a man drove a car into a crowd in the German city of Mannheim.
Authorities say they have concrete indications that the suspect had mental health problems. The motive of the attack remains unclear.
Es ist eine furchtbare Tat, ich habe es gesagt, ein Horror am helllichten Tag bei schönstem Wetter in der Mittagspause, wo viele Menschen draußen sind, mitten in einer Fußgängerzone. Es ist einfach unvorstellbar schreckliche Tat, die hier passiert ist. Und ich bin sicher, dass die Ermittlungsbehörden, die uns gerade ja auch auf dem Laufenden gehalten haben im Polizeipräsidium hier in Mannheim, alles dafür tun werden, die Tat auch aufzuklären.
The police have arrested the suspect who drove into the crowd at a carnival market. He has been identified as a 40-year-old German man. Officials say the man used a car as a weapon and drove into the crowd on purpose.
Prosecutors have initiated investigative proceedings against the suspect on 2 counts of murder and multiple counts of attempted murders. The suspect had a previous conviction from 2018 when he was convicted of far-right hate speech.
Wir haben zur Stunde, was die konkrete Motivation der Tat angeht, auch keine Hinweise auf einen extremistischen oder religiösen Hintergrund. Die Motivation könnte eher in der Person des Täters selber begründet sein. Das ist aber Gegenstand der laufenden Ermittlungen.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned of unimaginable consequences if Hamas does not release the remaining hostages held in Gaza.
Mr. Netanyahu's warning comes amid an impasse in negotiations after the first phase of the ceasefire expired over the weekend. Defense Minister Israel Katz echoed his boss, saying, quote, "The gates of hell will open if Hamas fails to heed the demand."
לא ישחרר בקרוב את החטופים, שערי עזה ינעלו ושערי הגיהנום ייפתחו. אנחנו נחזור ללחימה, והם יפגשו את צה"ל בעוצמות ובדרכים שהם לא הכירו. עד להכרעה מוחלטת, לא נאפשר לחמאס לעולם לשלוט בעזה.
Hamas has accused Israel of trying to sabotage the truce and push it back to square one. It rejected a U.S. proposal that's been backed by Israel to extend the first phase of the ceasefire over the Ramadan and Passover periods. And a militant group called it a blatant attempt to avoid negotiations for the second phase.
Israel has stopped the flow of supplies and aid into Gaza in a bid to pressure the militant group. The move has drawn widespread condemnation from the United Nations, regional powers, and others. Reports say Israel is also mulling cutting electricity to the enclave and displacing Gazans in the north. The measures are compounding the misery of Palestinians in the wake of Israel's onslaught, which has destroyed much of the infrastructure and claimed more than 48,000 lives.
لو ما دخلوش المساعدات حترجع المجاعة زي أول وأعطل من أول وبنسأل الله وبندعي لربنا إنها ما ترجعش المجاعة.
الدنيا رمضان يعني الواحد بده ياكل بده يشرب بيطلع له شيء بنبسط على الشيء هذا، بس برضه الواحد بده شيء كمان، إن هذا الاحتياج ما بتكفي، كل هذا بتكفيش، كلها ناقص، يعني من أسبوعين 3 كبونا لمين ولا بتكفيش ولا إيش ده رمضان.
Well, the UN has again called on Israel to resume supplies and aid to Gaza, reiterating it's unlawful to block access.
The Secretary General urged all parties to make every effort to prevent a return to the hostilities in Gaza. He calls for the humanitarian aid to flow back into Gaza immediately and for the release of all hostages. Tom Fletcher, our emergency relief coordinator, said that Israel's decision to halt aid into Gaza is indeed alarming. He added that international humanitarian law is clear. We must be allowed to access to deliver vital life-saving aid.
Underscoring the fragile truce, 2 Palestinians were killed on Monday in an Israeli strike in Gaza. The IDF said the men pose a threat to its troops who opened fire. Israel's military also struck a suspicious boat off the coast of Han Yunis, which it said was violating security restrictions.
U.S. President Donald Trump is set to deliver his address to the joint session of Congress after 6 weeks of introducing his second-term agenda at breakneck speed.
A slew of executive orders has upended much of his predecessor Joe Biden's vision for the country. Mr. Trump is expected to celebrate those changes and try to win over more of the country. Nick Harper reports from Washington.
This is the annual opportunity for the US president to speak to Congress and the American people about the health of the nation, the changes he's making, and what's ahead in the coming months. The first address of any presidency is not technically called a State of the Union, but it still comes with all the familiar pomp and circumstance and normally some theatrics thrown in. Trump's no stranger to joint addresses and State of the Union speeches. He's likely to receive a hero's welcome from Republicans. And it's expected much of his speech will focus on his domestic agenda as he gives insight into the last 6 weeks since he re-entered the Oval Office.
Absolutely one of the things Donald Trump is going to be doing on Tuesday is defending and explaining exactly what has been going on over the past couple of months, especially with regard to Elon Musk and the entire Doge project. This is a chance for him to explain to Americans his position that this is going to save them money in the long run, and perhaps they might even get a check in the mail as a bonus.
That could be the big crowd-pleasing announcement. The president has teased sending American taxpayers a check with his signature on it, money that has been recouped from Doge's cost-cutting efforts. But the president is likely to also make mention of multiple global issues.
For Donald Trump, he has had to come in with a number of different crises, including what's going on with Ukraine, President Zelensky maybe explaining a bit about what happened there, as well as talking about what's going on in Israel. And of course, we know that China is a big issue for him. And let's not forget that the border issue and the tariffs are something that are on the horizon. And he's going to want to explain those to the American people and why he thinks his plans in all four of these regards are going to be beneficial.
At a time of so much uncertainty, the president's words will have an impact, perhaps reassuring or perhaps worrying Americans and global allies alike. Nick Harper, CNA, Washington.
As Singapore's Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan weighed in on how the country continues to strike a balance between the two superpowers in a conversation with CNA's Shahida Othman. Dr. Balakrishnan described the city-state as a dependable partner amid global uncertainties and a new world order.
If they don't get along, how do we fit in? Well, the first thing I would say is we want to be relevant, we want to be useful, but you don't want to be crushed in between two conflicting superpowers. The way we do it is to play it straight. We tell them that we are not going to act at the behest of an adversary or rival against their interests. What we do with you and what we do with the other party will be open, transparent. Everyone can see what we're doing. And that's where it comes also to the activities of companies in Singapore. The reason companies want to come to Singapore is because we are open, we are predictable, we're reliable, we're trustworthy. But that also means we need to make sure companies don't use their association with us to get a short-term commercial advantage by engaging in evasive or dubious business practices. So, that high hygiene level is important because the Singapore paradigm of doing business is openness and trust. And that's critical to our value proposition. So, given the way the superpower relationship is unfolding, I believe there is still a role for an open, honest, reliable, trustworthy partner. And I use the word partner because it is a two-way relationship. The investments, the trade, the interactions. We have no intention of being a vassal state, of being a tributary, of being dependent. We believe in interdependence. We believe in mutual benefit. Now, to the extent that a tiny city-state can engage in that kind of relationship with big powers is an enormous challenge. And I've said in Parliament, we will never be their largest partner, trading partner or investor. But we can be their most reliable, their most dependable partner. And I believe if we can play this game straight, open, honest, transparent, we still have a role to play.
Singapore is seeking more information from Malaysia and the United States regarding servers linked to a fraud case. It says the servers, which likely contain NVIDIA AI chips, arrived here from the US and were bound for Malaysia. But Home Affairs Minister K. Shanmugam says that may not have been their true final destination. CNA's Richard Matthew with more.
In late February, Singapore authorities raided 22 locations on the island in an operation believed to be related to the alleged movement of NVIDIA chips. 9 people were arrested and 3 eventually charged with plans to defraud a supplier of servers.
There has been some speculation linking this case with the potential circumvention of U.S. export controls for advanced NVIDIA chips. Now, this case is unrelated. It's an independent investigation conducted by Singapore. We received an anonymous tip-off. It was not a tip-off or information from any country or sovereign entity, but we took the tip-off seriously. Investigation showed potential breaches of our domestic laws, and so we moved quickly to deal with it.
Preliminary investigations show that U.S. tech firms Dell and Supermicro had sent the servers to Singapore-based companies. They were then shipped on to Malaysia.
But the servers may have been intended for some other country, even though from Singapore they went to Malaysia. And if there were false representations within Singapore about final destination, that's an offense under Singapore laws.
In relation to the fraud case here, Singapore authorities have requests for more information from their counterparts in US and Malaysia, and that's because of the transnational nature of this case. Mr. Shanmugam says Singapore has also told US that they will work with the authorities if the servers did contain export control items. Charges for the accused individuals could also vary depending on the information received. Authorities are also engaging companies in Singapore about US rules and regulations regarding export controls.
We welcome reputable businesses to operate from here, to be part of our business environment, and to contribute to our growth. But we will not tolerate individuals and companies violating our laws or taking advantage of their association with Singapore to circumvent export controls of other countries. And this applies to all our trading partners.
NVIDIA's AI chips are at the center of the latest episode of a US-China tech war. The US is looking into whether Chinese AI platform DeepSeek is using NVIDIA chips, which are not supposed to be exported to China.
Still ahead, I will check on how China markets have opened after US President Donald Trump signed an order to hike duties on Chinese goods. And to help us digest the latest tariff measures and potential countermeasures, we will be joined by Sani Hamid from Financial Alliance.
The CNA Summit 2025 Trade-Offs in Leadership. Presenting partner, SingLife, a better way to financial freedom.
Leadership demands tough choices.
If you're trying to transition the company, change the strategy of the company, it's not really up to the investors, it's more up to the consumers.
Behind every decision lies an external trade-off.
Do you go fast, go big, or do you find such a way that you don't bet the farm?
What choices shape leadership today and redefine it tomorrow? Trade-offs in leadership. Highlights from the CNA Summit 2025. Tonight on CNA.
Impact partner, NVPC. Main partner, Oppo. Find N5.
Go back to yourself.
No, I don't want.
Go back to yourself.
I don't want. What can you do?
Want me to submit a report against you?
Go ahead. You think what I care about report?
In Singapore, something happens every minute, each event vying for your attention. We're always there to cover the news. But what if we also give you more? What if we told you we go deep into the data, find stories you care about, and explain issues clearly, from housing to healthcare, security to sustainability? We give you the bigger picture on Singapore Tonight.
3, 2, 1.
Hello and good evening. I'm Shahida Othman. Tonight's top stories.
Slightly minutes, slightly better.
You're watching Asia First. Let's get you a check on the greater China markets as they come online. Investors eyeing a potential Chinese stimulus package expected to be announced at the country's annual parliamentary gathering known as the Two Sessions. But today, Chinese markets starting the day off on the back foot there with the Shanghai Composite down 0.3%, Shenzhen Component 0.5% in the red, Hang Seng 1.3% lower. Now, stocks in Hong Kong, they were helped by the blockbuster IPO of bubble tea and drinks giant Mixue Group, which saw its shares jump some 40% yesterday. On its second day of trading, we're seeing it climb 4%. And investors are also weighing the impact of new U.S. tariffs. Beijing has warned that it would take countermeasures after Washington raised levies to 20% from 10%. And we're seeing shares in the red across the board, especially for those tech names. That's after its U.S. listed shares sank overnight. JD.com 2% lower, Alibaba pushing lower by about 4%, NIO tumbling 5.7%. And we're also tracking shares of Chinese EV firm BYD after the firm raised $5.6 billion in an upsized share sale, Hong Kong's largest in 4 years. It reinforced hopes of a revival following a years-long slump. BYD now lower by more than 7.5%. And we've got Sani Hamid on the line. He is Director for Wealth Management at Financial Alliance. So thanks for joining us, Sani. I want to look at Chinese stock moves ahead of the Two Sessions and your outlook for it ahead as it grapples with developments from Two Sessions as well as the escalating trade war.
Well, what we've seen basically is Chinese stocks have made this massive run-up in the past couple of weeks after the tech boom in China. Basically, the tech stocks were leading the way. The markets were caught short, meaning to say that prior to that, no one really wanted to touch Chinese stocks. So everybody was really underweight. No one owned Chinese stocks, even foreigners, whether in locals. And everybody was scrambling to bring on Chinese stocks onto their portfolios. So right now, market's taking a breather. I think ahead of the sessions, the Two Sessions itself, people will take profit and wait and see what the Two Sessions are about, whether it delivers what the market likes. And if so, potentially we could see Chinese stocks move even higher from here because people are still, I think, by and large, still underweight Chinese stocks.
So you're saying that this sort of reaction that we're seeing today is because of the markets taking a breather after they rushed to kind of, put Chinese stocks in their portfolio after seeing them do so well. And does that mean that you're not so concerned then about how the trade tariffs from Donald Trump are likely to hit Chinese stocks?
Well, to think about the markets, the market's forward-looking. Trade tariffs have been known for quite some time. So I think more or less we saw that being discounted a couple of months ago when the Chinese stocks really fell like a rock and went all the way down. So the market has, to a large extent, discounted the trade tariffs itself. Unless something new comes up, unless there are new restrictions, higher tariffs than expected, I think Chinese stocks have actually discounted by and large the trade tariffs.
I think we also got some reassurance that they would act. I mean, the Chinese government would act. And so what tools are they likely to deploy, or realistically, what can they afford to do? There's some expectations there would still leave some dry powder for whatever else that may come. In fact, one CCP-backed news media said that Beijing is considering retaliatory measures on U.S. agriculture and food products now.
Exactly. I think if there's one thing absolutely certain about tariffs is that countries which are hit with tariffs always retaliate. And I think very clearly they have to. I mean, otherwise they'll be seen as weak if they don't. And the last time Trump was in the presidency, China actually also imposed, as you mentioned correctly, tariffs on agriculture and food products. And it actually hit U.S. producers quite badly. So I think that would be the same playbook I think the Chinese will use for this time around, i.e. agriculture and food products from the U.S.
Now, Asia chip names have had quite a good run as well, in part thanks to DeepSeek, which gave Chinese stocks that much-needed boost. Overnight, we're seeing NVIDIA fall some 9% on tariff fears. And as we know, semicons, that's going to be caught, or that is in the crosshairs of U.S.-China trade tensions. How do you expect this to threaten Asia's chip or semicon industry, especially those South Korean, Japanese names, which have been doing quite well so far?
I think it's two ways. As you correctly mentioned, the boom in AI, especially in China itself, will increase demand for chips itself. On the other hand, the overvaluation of chip makers and AI stocks in the U.S. could see some rotation out from the U.S. into Asian chip makers, Asian AI stocks. And that would benefit the countries here. But at the same time, it's also on the other side, on the con side, basically the restrictions on chips could make it quite dicey because, again, there'd be restrictions on sending chips or selling chips to certain countries, countries which have become basically intermediaries or middlemen. How are they going to react? Are they going to be dampened because of this? So that part, I think, is less certain at this particular point.
All right, Sunny, appreciate your time this morning. Sunny Hamid there, Director for Wealth Management at Financial Alliance. And that is Asia Fest for today. Thank you for your company.
We're back again tomorrow. Meantime, you can get our headlines anytime, all the time at CNA.Asia. We also have radio, CNA 938.
Plus, we're on Facebook and YouTube. Have a good day.
This March, witness the fight for survival and change. Can science bring back what was lost? Explore the astonishing world of gene editing and cloning as scientists push boundaries beyond imagination on the resurrection quest. In southern Bangladesh, refugees, farmers and elephants fight to live in the same space. Is the Freedom Corridor the answer to their conflict? As technology evolves, so do the hidden threats shaping our world. Award-winning series Undercover Asia returns to investigate them. This March on CNA.
When you have neighborhood friends who are loitering in the streets, they tend to resolve conflict in a certain way. So they are actually quite mean to each other. I often tell my staff, you just have to try to keep them out of trouble as much as possible.
I took the blood test. It's okay, take the blood test again. No.
I was very naive. I didn't know there were that many children suffering from cancer.
So the moment I stepped into art, you know that feeling that you know that you just stepped into your second home.
Providing equal healthcare for persons with intellectual disability. We want to extend healthcare provision at the community setting. We need to be the advocates because we understand what it is to have good healthcare.
In certain setups in their system, they can find it quite challenging in some places. So I think that's why they find Play Buddy a place that they can feel belonged.
We killed them.
Is the resurrection of a species even possible?
These clones, they're the closest thing we have to real resurrection.
We're taking an elephant and we're making a little bit more mammoth-like.
I don't need one mammoth, I need like herds. If we want to establish a system, we need population.
This still involves an unprecedented amount of genome engineering.
You got to do it for the right reasons.
Is it going to be fair to that animal to bring it back into the world that we're in now?
If the question is de-extinction hubris or hope? I think the only honest answer is yes. It's a little bit of both.
The Resurrection Quest starts 15th March, Saturday on CNA.
Visionary or disruptor, Trump insider or Washington interloper.
Here's a drive to get things done.
As the world's richest man shakes up its most powerful nation.
And so this, violates democracy at its core.
Is he setting his sights on the rest of the world?
Fight for a great future for Germany.
Elon Musk, super influencer, Wednesday on CNA.
For your OCA. Everybody, let's go! This is one of the activities that I will miss most when I leave.
The CNA Summit 2025 Trade-Offs in Leadership is brought to you by presenting partner SeamLife, a better way to financial freedom. Impact partner NVPC, main partner Oppo Find N5.
Strategic decision-making is at the heart of leadership, and with it comes tough trade-offs. At the CNA Summit 2025, we explore the difficult choices leaders must make to achieve their goals.
I'm delighted to be able to join you here at the CNA Summit, which explores how leaders across different sectors manage tensions and trade-offs to achieve strategic outcomes. When you look at Singapore, you see tight constraints. We are a very small island city-state, no natural resources, no hinterland, vulnerable to the external environment. As a principle, we strive to do more and to do better for Singaporeans, and to avoid making stark binary trade-offs wherever possible. But inevitably, when constraints become more binding, we will have to manage tensions and make difficult trade-offs between competing objectives, For instance, given limited resources, do we meet today's pressing needs? Or do we save more for tomorrow's generation? Do we conserve or do we develop? How do we manage diverse and sometimes conflicting aspirations of different groups of Singaporeans? Now, despite these tight constraints, we've built a thriving global hub and vibrant city over 6 decades. We are home to a world-class seaport and air hub, a leading financial center, and with a home ownership rate of close to 90% in a city in nature. We've built a thriving global hub and vibrant city and are celebrating 60 years of nation building, or SG60, this year. But certainly in the years ahead, we will face even greater headwinds and challenges. The economic and geopolitical outlook is uncertain. Our population is aging. Technology-driven disruptions will be even more rapid. And we have to grapple with existential threats like climate change and rising sea levels. Like our pioneers, we strive to turn our challenges into opportunities. Prime Minister Lawrence Wong announced the SG60 budget 2 days ago, addressing current concerns, but also taking the long view to prepare Singapore and invest heavily in Singaporeans so that we can seize future opportunities amidst turbulence and uncertainty. Today, I will describe how we manage some of the tensions and trade-offs that we face in urban planning, namely 5 of our land optimization strategies, our 4 core approaches that guide them, and the 3 enablers that make them possible. I will then illustrate these in 2 foundational areas, as well as our singular goal in urban planning for Singapore as a city to remain livable, sustainable, and exceptional. One of the most obvious constraints for us is land. There are many pressing demands for land. At the same time, while we are a city, we also have to fit everything that a sovereign country needs within our city limits. This creates tremendous pressures. But over the decades, we've developed strategies to overcome some of these constraints, turn a challenge into an opportunity. First, as good stewards of land and resources, we optimize through intensification, build upwards and make use of vertical spaces. We also build mixed-use developments that integrate residential, commercial, and recreational spaces to reap benefits between synergistic users and to make our spaces more vibrant. One example would be Guoco Tower, a mixed-use development in Singapore's city centre, an ambitious 38-storey vertical city that comprises commercial, residential, retail, hotel, and green elements. Another example, our Tampines Hub, Singapore's largest integrated community and lifestyle hub. We have integrated a stadium and sports facilities, retail, a hawker centre, and a slew of other amenities in one single building. If we had to conventionally allocate individual land parcels for each of these users, the amount of land and resources consumed would have been much more. So that's first, optimize, intensify. Second, we try to unlock new spaces. One way is through reclamation. For example, more than 40 years ago, our pioneers decided to reclaim land to give us options to expand our city centre. This has allowed us to create a new business and financial hub, which you know as Marina Bay and Marina South. Another way is to go underground. For example, the Jurong Rock Caverns, Southeast Asia's first underground hydrocarbon storage cavern, is 150 meters below the ground level. This has freed up 60 hectares of surface land for other users. Third, we recycle our land and carry out strategic redevelopment. Brownfield sites can be repurposed for new developments, allowing us to reallocate spaces to meet both current and future needs. One major example would be Paya Lebar Air Base, which we will relocate to Changi from the 2030s onwards. This move will give us the opportunity to comprehensively redevelop the 800-hectare site and its surrounding industrial estates into a highly livable and sustainable new town. Fourth, we try to innovate to maximize our usage of space. Take the East Coast Integrated Depot set to open in 2026. This will be the first of its kind in the world. It combines a multi-story train depot as well as a bus depot. This will save us 44 hectares worth of land, or 60 football fields, and save 40% in construction cost. Fifth, we need to constantly think about and develop big strategic moves today for the prosperity of tomorrow. We must be prepared to reimagine our urban spaces, to create space and bandwidth for us to do even more. Take the Greater Southern Waterfront. It will be a major gateway for urban living along Singapore's southern coast. To free up large tracts of prime waterfront land, we are moving existing ports in Tanjung Pagar and Pasir Panjang westwards to the Tuas megaport. This also allows port operations to be more efficient. When completed in the 2040s, Tuas megaport will be the world's largest fully automated port. Now, at the core of it, there are 4 key approaches driving the 5 important optimization strategies that I've just mentioned earlier. The first is disciplined long-term planning. We have institutionalized this in our land use planning since the 1950s. Every 10 years, we undertake what we call a long-term plan review to plan 50 years into the future. Because land use changes take a long time to bring into effect. We then translate these planning strategies into a detailed master plan of every part of Singapore: housing, industry, recreation, healthcare, and more for the next 10 to 15 years. Second, we bring agencies and stakeholders together to execute and implement effectively. Preparing the land, putting in the infrastructure like roads and utilities and services, addressing pain points and disamenities as we roll out the projects and developments. Third, some plans are much longer term and benefit future generations. So we must be prepared to embark on projects that take decades to bear fruit and have the political will and the resources to follow through. These innovative projects are not easy, require time, effort, and resources to overcome complex technical challenges. Yet, we pursue them because the longer-term benefits are clear. They transform constraints such as land scarcity into catalysts for forward-thinking urban solutions and sustainable growth. For example, Long Island. It is an ambitious plan to reimagine our southeastern coast. It will protect our low-lying East Coast area against future sea level rise, and also create space for future needs such as housing, recreation, and jobs, and a new reservoir of fresh water to enhance our water security. It will take many decades to complete, and we've just started. But we have to start coastal protection work now, because the price of delay or failure will be too high for future generations to have to bear. Fourth, even while we plan for the long term, we should also stay nimble and agile, and be prepared to refresh our plans and even change them to keep pace with emerging trends and developments. This was particularly important during black swan events like the COVID pandemic. We had to find land and adapt spaces for additional medical facilities, for dorms, and other urgent uses. Now, while our 5 optimization strategies in urban planning and our 4 core approaches help us to overcome land and other constraints, there are 3 important enablers that must be in place to help us turn vision into reality. 1, technology, AI, and digital tools. We've always been pushing boundaries in using technology and digital tools to plan, design, and build more efficiently. Recent developments in artificial intelligence can only add to this. For example, the Digital and Planning Lab at the URA has been integrating GIS, or Geographical Information System technology, big data analytics, and modeling and simulation tools into the URA's urban planning processes. These help our planners to anticipate changes in demographic needs or activity, as well as mobility patterns, to enhance our precision, efficiency, and foresight. 2, we must engage the public and our stakeholders extensively and deeply. We conduct briefings, dialogues, town halls, citizen panels, and more to develop plans with the public and for people with different interests and perspectives to hear from one another. We do this for many of our major plans. In fact, just yesterday evening, I was at an engagement at URA with 160 young Singaporeans on our draft master plan. More than 100 questions. To better understand our evolving housing needs, we have also engaged 16,000 people in our Forward Singapore engagements since 2022. And this has guided real policy changes. I give you just one example. Due to public consensus in our housing conversations under Forward Singapore, we adjusted our public housing policy in 2023 to give even greater public housing priority for parents and married couples who are buying their very first home. As a result, about 9 in 10 of such applicants have so far been invited to book a flat in categories where they're given first priority at the first try. We also create Alliances for Action, or AFAs, where government partners Singaporeans to address common challenges. Each member contributes their perspectives and resources, and together as an Alliance for Action, we achieve more than the sum of our individual efforts. 3, our success has been anchored thus far by our strong social compact. This compact embodies a mutual understanding. While government is committed to doing its part, Singaporeans also play a critical role. For generations, Singaporeans have looked beyond our own personal interests and made sacrifices. Now, you know, aspirations can outstrip the reality of our size and our resources. Yet a truly successful society is one where everyone succeeds together. And for this to happen, we must continue to foster a strong sense of collective responsibility and to constantly think of the next generation's needs. These principles are not new. Let me just talk about 2 examples where our pioneers also face trade-offs, in fact, far more intense than today, and make difficult but necessary decisions to open new pathways for Singapore's longer-term success. One example is public housing. In our early years, we started public housing and the HDB to address urgent housing shortages and poor living conditions. Our pioneers also had a clear vision that owning a home would give Singaporeans a strong stake in our fledgling nation. Now, for them, it was not just about building flats or estates, but building a nation. At the same time, there was no certainty that this was the better path. Like many other countries, we might have left it to the private sector, while the government provided basic housing as a social safety net. But they decided rightly that this would not have achieved the same social and economic outcomes. Home ownership could end up out of reach for many if left entirely to the private sector and market forces. So our pioneers chose to take the more difficult path. Government had to acquire land, and there was a large fiscal cost to build our public housing estates over the decades. But their vision has paid off. Today, around 80% of Singaporeans live in HDB public housing, and we have one of the highest homeownership rates in the world. Through our public housing system, we have been able to pursue many important social objectives. So housing not just as infrastructure, but principally as social policy, such as fostering an inclusive society, promoting multiculturalism, supporting the aspirations of families, and better supporting our seniors as they age in place, empowering vulnerable groups through policies like Compling Plus, for instance. As the largest developer of housing in Singapore, HDB also pushes the boundaries in technology adoption. Today, it is our turn to carry on the work that our pioneers started. But society evolves and our public housing policies must keep pace. For example, we want to ensure that all places remain accessible to Singaporeans from different walks of life. So we support social mixing in our public housing estates. We have seen that in other metropolitan cities and societies, Homes in attractive locations, more central locations, are more expensive, and over time they become accessible only to the wealthy, while others are pushed further out into the suburbs or further in to deprived inner cities. This stratifies society and stokes tensions between different groups of the haves and the have-nots. To try to counter these forces, we implemented the new flat classification framework, Standard, Plus, and Prime. This major policy move will enable us to build affordable public housing in choicier and more central areas, such as the Greater Southern Waterfront, Bukit Timah, Turf City, and others, to keep our neighborhoods and communities diverse while ensuring that the system of public subsidies remain fair. Our public rental flats can also be found in more areas across Singapore, even in plus and prime locations, and integrated with other BTO flats. In fact, our very first prime location public housing project in Rochor has rental flats built in with soul flats. This gives our families in public rental housing better access to the same facilities, schools, and other amenities. We cannot take present success for granted. We must continue to keep improving our foundations for our next generation. Let me highlight another foundational example, our city in nature. Today, we are one of the greenest cities in the world. We have nature reserves and nature areas in the heart of the city, parks and green spaces across the island, and diverse marine habitats in our waters. This did not happen by chance. Think about it. In the 1960s, newly independent and newly industrializing, small, densely populated Singapore could easily have become a concrete jungle, a city of brick, mortar, and steel, like so many other cities. In fact, if you look at old archival photos of Singapore and the city area, you won't see that many trees. But from the outset, our founding Prime Minister, the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, saw what greening could mean for Singapore. So the highly pragmatic idealist. He saw that it would give people respite from the city, distinguish ourselves and attract investments back then. Greenery could also be a social leveler, where all Singaporeans had access to green spaces. And so over the past 60 years, successive generations of Singaporeans have been stewarding our environment, intentionally building a green and livable city, even as we face ever more intense land use pressures. When we must continue this work so that future generations can enjoy the same livable environment. Now, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew once said, and I quote, "We face tremendous odds with an improbable chance of survival," unquote. And over the past 60 years, we've not just survived, but managed to thrive. Looking ahead, we will continue to face immense challenges. If we focus only on binary trade-offs, allow competing tensions to pull society apart, or fail to steward our land and resources well, then we risk succumbing to the odds of improbability. But our history has shown us that instead of choosing between one or the other, we have constantly found ways to try to do more with so much less, to grow our economy, create good jobs, while creating a livable home for Singaporeans, to build a thriving metropolis while respecting our heritage and natural environment. This is possible only because generations of Singaporeans have remained committed to one another through a strong social compact. As Prime Minister Lawrence Wong said during his budget speech, and I quote, "At every turn, we've chosen determination over despair, innovation over stagnation, and solidarity over division," unquote. Everything flows from this. Our ability to plan long-term, make trade-offs fairly, rally Singaporeans to make sacrifices for the common wider good, and deal with whatever challenges might come our way. With our refreshed social compact under Forward SG, I'm confident that we have what it takes to turn future challenges into opportunities and to bring Singapore to greater heights. With that, thank you.
What if you have somebody who is not so good in purpose, but super aligned with your organization? What do you do?
The middle class is perceived as a strength of the economy. Rising middle class is a sign of country doing better.
Yet, Thailand's middle class is buried in a mountain of debt.
รู้สึกแย่ค่ะรู้สึกอึดอัดเหมือนกับว่าทำไมฉันศักยภาพฉันหาเงินไม่ได้มากกว่านี้อะไรอย่างเงี้ย
กินอะไรไม่ได้ก็ต้องเผื่อตังค์ไว้คิดไว้ก่อนนะกินอันนี้ปุ๊บพอนี้ไหม
And what is driving this trend?
เรากำลังมีคนชั้นกลางที่จนลง
Insight, Thursday on CNA.
I'm traveling the world uncovering tech that gives early warning signals to forest fires.
So the sensors woke up.
It's detected something in the air.
Where extraordinary innovation is helping land and people.
So, Ilionimo ang set deployment site.
Lots of people earn a lot of money with data. So why not the communities on the ground, right?
Tech to save the world. Friday on CNA.
When the whole house is transformed brighter, it makes them feel normal again. Not just we bring joy to the elderly, we also bring joy to ourselves.
Mungkin apa yang awak alami adalah sesuatu yang saya boleh belajar. Jadi jangan rasa, alah, malulah. Siapalah saya kan. Mungkin orang semua dah tahu. I learn a lot from the caregivers who share in my class. Even the mistakes that they've made, you know, we are all humans. We are all trying our best.
一个礼拜大概要打电话一次，因为要问平安。很安你，谢谢你照顾我。
中国有很多义工都是70-80岁也在做，这时候，我就在想，人出一份力就出那一份力了。
Extraordinary People starts 8th March, Saturday on CNA.
You cannot. Gossip, right? It become very common.
You talk about me when I was away.
You'll confront that person whether it's true or not.
Don't put words in my mouth. Don't put. Correct, ma. Still.
We kick things off with you, Tabor, right at the end there. Tell us about the most pivotal point in your own career where you were identified as a promising talent for an employer to groom you into what you are today.
I think it actually comes down to the, maybe courage of one man who back about 30 years ago decided to take a punt and take a risk and just hire me from the outside of the organization. And, I started back in 1995 with ABN AMRO, and after having a few discussions with the then CEO, he decided to give me a chance, and he took a risk. And instead of simply just leaving it to the HR or some business heads, or simply just saying, none of my business, he actually took the risk of maybe going against a little bit the usual norm, and instead of just taking somebody from the inside, he decided to say, well, maybe this boy at that time has some potential. So clearly that was a lifelong lesson to me, right, that I'm trying also to replicate in my practice, because it showed leadership, showed some courage, and also as a CEO, he has shown that he honestly cared about talent and went that extra step, not only for me, but for many other colleagues in his practice later on. This created not only loyalty on my end, but from the whole team that was hired in that way. And I have to say that cohort has become part of a very robust, long training program. A team was built that is connected even 30 years later. And again, it was just because somebody decided to do something a little bit out of the ordinary.
That he took a chance on you. So from those lessons, Tabor, you make this observation that the typical recruitment process is, you scour what's out there, you search for that talent for and within those companies, and then typically this starts with recruitment. You identify the right kind of talent for that role, and then you pursue further development for that talent as a means of retaining it, right? Would you say that process still exists in that exact order?
It does, right? You go through the identification of the talent, and you then try to create pathways and means for the talent to strive in the organization. Now, I think what has maybe changed over time is that, for global firms, it is becoming more and more challenging to attract talent. If you think about what happened after COVID, priorities of the workforce has changed. And also the new generations that we need to deal with has a very different view of what career is about. So, how do you drive that so that you can create an interesting employee value proposition for talent and keep them is what is making things difficult, right? So how do we maintain a balance between the company needs global talent, but the talent may not need a global company? And therefore, we're trying to develop various tools that will help talent stay. And for those that we hire, we try to hire the kind of profile that wants to be with Citi. What does that mean? That our vision, that our value proposition, that our mission aligns with what they want to achieve in their lives. But equally, we're really doing a lot to develop talent locally. Like, for example, here in Singapore, we're trying to ensure that people locally have ways to learn, develop, and get various different pathways, be it jumping from one business to another, or maybe going between businesses or within the business. Now, what we're also trying to do is make sure that we keep track of, let's say, our Singaporeans, and we have about 100 of them everywhere globally, and try to see what they've learned. Can we use that by bringing them back? So it's a mix of tools that we constantly need to kind of balance, given the change in the talent pool and what people consider important.
Now, Ping Soon, how would you go about identifying someone whom you see the potential to not just fit the role, but the company's culture as well? That's really important, and I think most often overlooked as well. But also to groom and hopefully get them to ride the company's journey as well. So it's a personal journey, but also the company's journey is important as well. So how do we identify someone who has that ability and promise to ride the wave of the company with you, get them for the long term?
I would start by saying that I think leading any organization today is more difficult. And I think it is the most difficult period of times for leadership. The geopolitical uncertainties are real. You talk about the technological disruptions, right? From ChatGPT to DeepSeek. You talk about the need for energy transition. And all this is happening when a workforce is expecting greater autonomy, greater empowerment, greater flexibility, greater mobility. So it is not easy to be a leader today. So the question is, what do you look out for? Let me offer 5 traits of what I look for in a leader. Number one, you need somebody who has some skills and competencies, so you can measure that kind of by IQ, right? EQ. So I think these 2 people are familiar with. I'll just add 3 more Qs. The third Q is LQ. Do you look for somebody who is very good at that role, or somebody who may not be very good at that role, but you can sense in that person the willingness and ability to learn? The reality is that you may not know everything, and you must be prepared to do that. And I think that's what that boss of yours look out for you, right? You probably don't know a lot of the job, but you're prepared to learn. So you look for people who are no longer kind of know it all, but learn it all. And I think today, in today's age, where skills are deteriorating at such a fast pace, is absolutely important. So we look for that learning quotient. The 4th Q, and I call it the values quotient. I'm sure every one of you in your organizations has values, but is your organization living it up? Are those values actually translated to actual behaviors? And are these behaviors used as a guide for you to decide about talent? Let's talk about the trade-off between values and performance, right? So if you can imagine, any consultant will have a 2x2 box. You've got some paper and pen. If you can't visualize it, you can draw that 2x2 box on your paper. So draw a 2x2, your y-axis, performance, right? Low and high. Your x-axis, values, low and high. It's very simple when you have to deal with people on the top right-hand box. High in performance, high in values, you reward them, right? People who are on your diagonally bottom left, quite simple, right? Low in performance, low in values, replace them. But the challenge is on the other 2, right? What if you have somebody who is not so good in performance, is not incompetent, but performance level not so good, but super aligned with your organization? What do? Do you remove them? I would suggest you don't, especially in Singapore, when you have a very tight labor market. I think you need to redeploy. Maybe it's not a good job fit. You need to retrain them. But I think the biggest, at least for me, in the past organization I led, is to deal with that person who is your star player, is a high performer, bring the bacon home, but very low alignment with your company. Do you have the moral courage to actually replace that person? That's not easy.
Yeah.
So I think you really need to pay attention to that. The last quotient is what I call the personality quotient. I think in today's day and age, positive energy is important. I think for leaders to succeed, you need to kind of know what makes you tick. You need to look for people who knows how to develop and protect their mind, their body, and spirit. Right? Especially in today's uncertainty and the need to really learn and relearn. Leaders are looking for more connection, more authenticity, and more inspiration. You really need to find that.
Yeah.
Now, if you can find that person, let me know, because I'm looking to hire that person.
I want to be devil's advocate here, because we talk about how we hire talent, how to look out for the right talent, the right fit for our companies. What about the flip side? How do we assess and determine what to look out for in a leader that we want to follow, that we're inspired by? What kind of traits must that leader have?
So the leader has to be empathetic. The leader has to be able to have that honest conversation with that person. People can fake it once or twice during interviews, but nothing beats some kind of reference check and just having that honest conversation and put on the person on certain assignment and really see whether is there a dissonance between what he says he do and what he actually does.
Walking the talk.
Walking the talk.
Perlin, I wonder if you've experienced developing talent that you've eventually had to release to the big wide world after you've groomed them. It's quite a big trade-off. It's a sacrifice as a leader to groom this person, invest so much. How did that feel?
I think it all boils down to what your intent is, right? Are we building careers, or are we just filling a job? Right? Are we just looking at the talent there purely to fill up a job opening? I think it's only natural that talents are poached and targeted. That's why they are talents, right? And the more they are poached and targeted means the better the job the company must be doing in developing and exposing the person's capabilities to the industry. We don't necessarily have to look at it as a sacrifice. I think, of course, it's always, with a little bit of regret that, somebody that you've been investing in has decided to join the outside world, if you will, right? But I do believe that it can be a win-win for the individual and for the organization. For the individual, we hope that the individual goes out, learns new experiences, and comes back one day.
And realize the grass is not always greener on the other side.
That's right. It also gives the organization an opportunity to ventilate and perhaps surface the next generation of new leaders into bigger roles, right? And thirdly, I do think it does a lot for the reputation of the company. Because if you develop talents well and you invest in your talent, it does speak a lot about how long-term and how sustainable the company is for the long run.
I think the trademark of a good organization is that you are a talent factory.
Biodiversity is booming, which is inviting for some local foragers and farmers who embrace edible wildlife.
We're the largest organic banana grower in Singapore.
This is a gem.
Amazing. So the mulberries are from the garden.
No, that's delicious.
Singapore is ramping up conservation efforts locally and across the region.
I really do love reptiles and finding out about them, so I really love my job.
Building must relate to the lives of the people.
目前还是一直要创新一些新的东西。我也不希望是人家把我看作是80岁的人。
There are those who dare to be different, who have made their mark in Singapore and beyond.
You have such big dreams, you want to change the world with your art.
Obviously, every fighter wants to win, so all you can do is to prepare yourself to win.
First thing in the morning as Asia wakes up to a new day. Get up to speed with major events shaping lives in the region and other parts of the world.
Putting things in perspective with eye-opening reports and expert analysis as a new era of global politics breeds power struggles and shifting alliances.
We get to the heart of the matter and take stock of the issues you're invested in with on-the-ground reports and wall-to-wall coverage. Viewing it all from a regional lens because we put Asia first.
We killed them.
Is the resurrection of a species even possible?
These clones, they're the closest thing we have to real resurrection.
We're taking an elephant and we're making a little bit more mammoth-like.
I don't need one mammoth, I need like herds. If we want to establish a ecosystem, we need population.
This still involves an unprecedented amount of genome engineering.
You got to do it for the right reasons.
Is it going to be fair to that animal to bring it back into the world that we're in now?
If the question is de-extinction hubris or hope? I think the only honest answer is yes. It's a little bit of both.
The Resurrection Quest starts 15th March, Saturday on CNA.
Tibor, when you look at your workforce in today's context and you're deciding how to allocate training resources for talent development, what are the trade-offs you're willing to make for that bigger outcome?
Banking, but I guess any organization is a team sport. So I personally, at least, don't like to think of the continuum of our talent pool as stars and then soldiers, because that implies you can kind of sacrifice them easily, and then wherever else, right? It's like a soccer team where that particular, traditionally speaking, star who kind of always scores, can't do that if there is no perfect execution along the chain. The other one is we do have to have a meritocracy, and in meritocracies, we have to be able to measure performance and make some tough decisions. We are developing very transparent frameworks within which everyone knows if they're a star or if they have some room to improve. So it's not going to be based on some soft, undefinable metrics. So what we need to then also take into consideration as managers or leaders is the third concept, which is the availability of talent. And you referred to that as well, here, both of the panelists, which is that we are competing in a space where we are kind of losing talent, gaining talent, producing talent just to export it. We need to make sure that value proposition that we have, remains relevant for our star performers. What we want to achieve is that everyone knows that they can become a star within their own speciality, and then they will be taken care of. But it's equally clear, and has to be clear, that if somebody does not perform, it has consequence. The availability for growth and learning is there for everybody. And we at Citi believe in exposure and experience and formal education, where experience is about 70% of someone's growth, exposure is about 20, and let's say 10 is in fact your formal learning, because you do come into a job at the end of the day learning. So what we want to do is communicate to employees that they have to take ownership of their careers as well. They have to do their part to become stars. We will definitely do everything in our power to make sure that they can perform. And of course, as you become a star, you get that much more resource.
Being so, you'd also have to contend with competing internal priorities that are basically competing for your attention, while also mapping out how to allocate these talent development resources effectively, right? You've been CEO of GovTech, a public agency, and now you're a CEO of SBF. It's a business chamber, and it's an NGO. What is one thing that's worked for you in terms of the balance between delivering business results, your KPI, and investing in talent development as well?
I really like to call out to all businesses out there, do not be afraid to lose your talent. I think the trademark of a good organization is that you are a talent factory. One of the challenges for leaders nowadays is the managing of dualities, right? How do you deliver today, and how do you transform the organization for tomorrow? How do you deal with external stakeholders to deliver value and dealing with your internal stakeholders, the largest which are employees? I had the privilege to steward the GovTech for a period of 5 years. So I came in at point of GovTech in terms of organization transformation. So I really joined the organization at that point where I had to undergo what I call a dual transformation. It's about how do you move an organization and rebuild engineering capability for you to deliver the digital government? How do you move from project management to product management? How do you do from outsource to insource? How do you move from waterfall to agile? Hence, what can we do? What do I need to do? The challenge that I face is what I call our clothes don't fit anymore. And because when I joined the organization, it's about 1,008. When I left, it's about 4,000. And over that period of time, it's really how do you optimize the current workforce to change the way you do things, but at the same time build that new capacity. And doing that is not easy. There are some people who may not be very good performers, but align with the organization. Do you kind of sack them all and then bring a new bunch? You can't. But to grow that new what, you had to pay special attention. We had to set up a government digital services, hire a bunch of people, which is a very different profile from what we had in the 2008. And we got to set it up very differently, even put it away from the main HQ, different pay scheme, different career path. But what do you do as a leader when you have both trying to transform the optimizing the current workforce and build a new workforce? If you don't do it well, you end up a very bimodal organization. You end up against us, against them. So how do you then thoughtfully build the capabilities, the process, and linkages between the people who are in the existing as well as them? I need people who are pioneers, people who can bring from 0 to 1. But I need the settlers too.